You are watching Morning Live, and just about now we get into our interview with Dr. Gabriel Pollen. He's National Coordinator coming from the DMMU, as we just look at issues around the dry spells that the country has been experiencing, some parts of the country, I must say, and just how prepared we are as a country, just the response towards the anticipated food security due to the poor rainfall that some parts of the country has experienced. And he is in studio with us. Good morning, Dr. Pollen.
Good morning.
It's nice to have you on set.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
I know that you've undertaken a tour to just ascertain the situation. Tell us more about that tour that you've taken across the country and what your findings were.
Thank you very much for that question. I think based on the presidential directive to ascertain the level of devastation due to the dry spell, we undertook area surveillance with a consortium of people from the Ministry of Agriculture, DMMU itself, Meteorological Department, to check the areas that were reported to experience prolonged dry spells. So what we did was not just area surveillance, but also to just get down on the ground to appreciate what was really going on, and to have a rapid spot check confirmation of the scale and scope of devastation of the field. So what was encouraging, first of all, was that indeed people paid attention when the president called upon most of us to grow food. We should have been grappling with storage and logistical challenges as opposed to dry spell now, but but people should not be dispirited. I think we should be encouraged by what we've done. But at the same time, lessons learned in terms of agricultural practices and our adaptive capacity as a country more broadly. So from the rapid assessments that we've undertaken, it's very, very clear. And I think that, and it's been confirmed even from social media postings, very, very clear that the scale of devastation is rather worrying. Yeah.
Which parts of the country had hit?
So it's the southern part of the country, because if you look at the way Zambia is, it can be divided into two parts. You've got the southern part, you've got the northern part. So for the southern part, we're essentially talking about virtually every part of southern province, most parts of western province, Lusaka province, most parts of the southern part of central province, and a little bit of eastern province as well. So we are reporting substantial rainfall and indeed some flooding in Luapula and the northernmost part of the country. So you could see that differential in terms of weather patterns, but the southern part of the country has been hugely inundated by the prolonged dry spell.
Earlier in the, when we were reading our headlines, we had Chief Chitimkulu talk about the fact that the northern province is likely to, be the food basket for the country. Is that what you found on the ground when you did your aerial survey and just your food survey? So
the aerial surveillance was focused mainly on the areas that were experiencing dry spells, but obviously we do have officers as government everywhere basically. You've got agricultural extension officers, you've got regional coordinators for disaster management, you've got the district disaster management officers who are on the ground and can appreciate that in areas where we have sufficient rainfall and there was substantial agricultural activity, there is hope that we could get some good yields there. But the extent to which the growing areas right now that are adequately supported by rainfall have the capacity to provide deficit areas is something that is still ongoing based on the existing and currently ongoing interventions. Okay. But this is also just to point out that historically, traditionally, and also the way things pan out for Zambia, you find that the areas that are most badly hit by the prolonged dry spells are the ones that actually grow the most food. But stark contrast, based on what we saw, is that areas that are being irrigated, so basically for commercial farmers, you have center pivots, you have commercial irrigation infrastructure in place, and crops are thriving. So that tells you that you can respond to the vagaries of the weather using technology, but also using more adaptive practices in terms of agricultural options.
Let's get down to your response as DMMU. how are you planning to respond to, obviously you've done your mapping, you've established the places that are hard hit, but let's get down to finding the response towards what you found on the ground.
Okay, so first of all, we'll start by talking about what we do on a normal year as a disaster management mitigation unit. We undertake what is known as an in-depth vulnerability and needs assessment at the end of every crop cycle, particularly around April, May, through the Zambia Vulnerability Assessment Committee, which is basically a consortium of government agencies as well as corporate and partners, local and international NGOs. And what we do from there is we ascertain the impact of the rainfall season, and then we assess the deficit areas, we assess the surplus areas, and then we indicate which areas would require relief, and then we wait for the lean period, which is essentially around October to March. So traditionally, you find that during that period of time, the government would have collected data and we're providing relief to the most vulnerable affected citizens in that lean period. But what we do see from this anomaly is that relief might need to be extended beyond the lean periods, because people will not be expecting much of a yield based upon obviously what is existing right now in terms of the devastation to the crop fields. So the government is really deeply looking into this, concerned about the nature of what is really going on the agricultural scene, but also coming up with some more innovative ways of dealing with the vagaries of the weather.
Okay. Speaking of a response, earlier you did make mention that, for instance, commercial farmers are not affected as much because they've used technology. It might take a while for subsistence farmers to get to that level where they use technology. Do you see yourselves encouraging them, for instance, to grow drought-resistant crops, looking at what's prevailing on the ground?
Absolutely. I think you're spot on over there. I mean, what this experience has taught all of us is that we need to adapt to the vagaries of the weather, which is basically climate change. So we need to engage more seriously in adaptive farming practices, and one of the key intervention options is obviously the growing of more resistant crops. And areas that used to traditionally grow sorghum and millet, and these are the options that are more drought resistant but still offer substantial nutritional value for the people, have been over time ignored. But this opportunity that we see now is basically an invitation for people to rethink the way they do things. And as you rightly pointed out, it will indeed take a bit of time before subsistence farmers and small-scale farmers can engage in more technologically advanced options for agricultural production. So in this vein, we would argue that there are options to understand soil regenerative capacity, and also because of rampant tree cutting in order to provide a biofuel, there'll be need to encourage your communities to plant as much trees as they can, because then that helps with the weather patterns and the ecosystem around those areas. So more broadly, you would argue that options are still there, and this is really not just doom and gloom.
The extension of the lean period, the possibility of the extension, looking at what's on the ground, do we have the capacity to do so as DMMU? Where do you get this stock from? Is it from FRA? Who are you working with to ensure that we will have enough stock? Yeah,
I mean, as you know, based on the mandate of the Food Reserve Agency, the Food Reserve Agency is basically strategic national reserves that are supposed to be deployed in times of substantial deficits such as this. We have also engaged farmers who had carryover stock to ensure that they didn't have to export that, to keep that for the sake of national security. But you'd also appreciate that one of the innovative interventions that the government undertook was to ensure against the drought. So we undertook, through the Disaster Management Mitigation Unit, a drought insurance through the African Risk Capacity of the African Union. You'll recall that in 2022, because of the triggered parameters, Zambia received $5.3 million based on the drought insurance. And I think if the data holds and the parameters shift in our favor, we're likely to receive much more than that. In addition, there was an innovative intervention by the World Food Programme based here in Zambia to undertake a similar insurance program. We call it replica insurance. So not only has the government insured, but we also have substantial backing, and we expect a larger payout should the situation. And then that puts everything in context in terms of resource availability to be able to respond more holistically to the food insecurity situation.
Okay.
Let's get down to who the priority beneficiary is in this regard. Are you looking at a priority in terms of who benefits? Have you considered maybe the aged and the children?
Yeah.
How is this working?
Absolutely. So the way that the relief distribution is designed is to first of all have a segment of society or community called the vulnerable, and within that vulnerable section we have the 80-20 rule, where 80% is food for work. So basically those who are vulnerable but viable and therefore can participate productively in the economy, those can come on board to actually work for this food that we give out. But then the 20% will be prioritized for free, essentially, to the disabled, the aged, and the children. And that's fundamentally how the relief design is formulated, to encourage people, despite being vulnerable, to encourage them also to still be productive, to sell themselves, to sell their labor and receive a reward for it.
Okay.
Earlier you did make mention, for instance, that in Northern Province there are some places that have floods. To what extent do you think these will cause damage, or they are not as bad as the damage that could be caused that has been caused in the southern part of the country?
Damage in terms of?
The floods, have they caused any damage to the crops?
Oh yes. I mean, there are some areas that have experienced substantial flooding, and that has wiped out some food crops. But also, in addition to that, it has also threatened the integrity of public infrastructure, particularly that's related to housing, and also related to crossing points, for example, which is basically transport and communication channels for these communities to function normally. So the flooding does have substantial impact upon the way in which people live their lives. But the extent to which that has completely wiped out different fields is something that is currently ongoing in terms of our assessment, and we'll be able to have more apposite data at the end of the rainy season itself.
As we let you go, what's your assurance to everybody that we have the DMMU well prepared to respond to the looming food shortage that we could have, especially in the southern part?
Very, very clearly that the President has continuously reminded us that, do the most that you can. As a disaster management mitigation unit, this is the mandate of the institution, and the push essentially is to ensure that no Zambian dies from hunger. So the government is prepared, the government is aware, the government does have adequate architecture, infrastructure in terms of systems, mechanisms, in terms of equipment to ensure that food is made available and distributed to the areas that will experience deficits.
Okay, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Pollen.
Thank you.
There you have it. We've just been speaking to Dr. Gabriel Pollen, who is from the Disaster Management and Mitigation Unit, sharing with us how ready they are to respond to food shortage that could be experienced due to the adverse weather patterns.